Santa Claus the movie is almost as bizarre a pop culture relic as you'd expect from something with the audacity to stick the movie branding onto the textbook definition of a public domain mythological character. But it's also possessed of a reputation that somehow managed to outpace the film itself, which is impressive when you consider the idea that the same producer team responsible for the Christopher Reeve Superman movies deciding to effectively make the same basic kind of film but for Santa Claus feels like it should guarantee a must-see in and of itself. It was famously expensive and even more famously a box office failure back in 1985, and was largely lambasted by critics, many of whom opted to focus on the presence of product placement since this was the period when Coca-Cola actually owned this particular movie studio, and it was practically a game to call that sort of thing out. In any case, the release was notoriously bungled, and the film mostly passed into legendary bombs, legend, but since this was also the boom period of the VHS era, the film did end up quickly becoming part of many an 80s kid's regular December rotation. I won't even front, when I was a kid, Santa Claus the movie was one of our family's staples, right up there with Charlie Brown Christmas, Rudolph, and the Grinch. In fact, it kind of blew my mind to later discover that most people seemed to have disliked it, heard it was bad, and stayed away, or had never seen or heard of it, period. But evidently my family wasn't the only one who clued into it, because it became a reappraised movie over the last decade or so, and is now regarded by many as something of a cult classic. But how is it actually? Well, even accounting for my own nostalgic bias, I happen to find it pretty damn charming, with a handful of moments, mostly in the first half, that are legitimately wonderful to behold, but it's also certainly an odd duck of a film. You can never accuse the Salkin family of not having plenty of ideas, and much like the latter Superman and Supergirl movies, Santa Claus seems to have tried to fit all of them into a single production. It has the same unusual 5-act structure as the first Superman movie, but it doesn't quite segue as naturally into the second half. As a result, it feels like one actually really terrific, sweet, enthralling kids movie that abruptly switches over into being its own bizarre, darker, gritty, status quo upending sequel right at the midpoint, and while there's some fascinating stuff in the second half, it doesn't really work quite as well. But that first half really is pretty much magic. The producers are basically applying that "you will believe a man can fly" challenge from Superman to "you will believe in Santa Claus," and it goes about it in the same way of sticking really close to visual tradition, no matter how potentially goofy, but playing things 100% straight. Apart from giving Santa himself an origin story as a childless toy maker rescued along with his wife from a blizzard by magical elves in ancient times to become an immortal chosen one empowered to bring their toys to the world's children, there really isn't a plot for the whole first half of the movie. Instead, it's more like a step-by-step walkthrough using state-of-the-art special effects and sprawling set design to answer all of your how-does-he-do-that questions about the Santa Claus legend, how the sleigh works, where the elves came from, where the naughty and nice lists came in, how the toys get made, what makes the reindeer fly, how he does it all in one night. And if you see this at the right age, or can zap yourself back to that mindset, this stuff is legitimately enthralling, especially given the production designer's decision to make everything look like the world's biggest and most expensive mall Santa display. The whole first half of the movie looks like every Santa's Village setup you've ever seen, but blown out as though it's a functional, lived-in world that goes on forever. And it must be said, the late David Huddleston is probably the best movie Santa Claus there ever was, outside of Miracle on 34th Street. Yeah, I'd have liked to seen the version that John Carpenter almost made with Brian Dennehy. No, go look it up, that almost happened for real. But this guy will always be Santa Claus to me as far as I'm concerned. Then you get to the second half, though, and the movie tries to suddenly have a storyline and be about something other than enjoying a fantasy where Santa Claus could actually exist, and things just get strange. The focus of the plot shifts over to Dudley Moore as an elf who goes into self-exile after an attempt to automate the toy production goes awry and ends up getting used by John Lithgow as an evil toy company magnate named BZ who wants to create his own profit-driven competing holiday to Christmas, and you can probably start to see where the problem is. It must be said though, Lithgow is amazing in this. He's basically playing a more cartoonishly evil version of Montgomery Burns crossed with a then-current takeoff on Donald Trump, so, you know, don't say nobody tried to warn you. But the movie plays his goofy evil exactly as straight as it plays the Santa Claus fairy tale stuff. Like, our introduction to this guy is getting prosecuted for selling teddy bears stuffed with glass and nails instead of, you know, stuffing. And the movie doesn't treat this as a joke or some kind of satirical gag. It's just presented as, yup, that's a thing he did, this guy's pretty evil, huh? It's a jarring tonal shift made more so by the movie refusing to acknowledge that the tone has shifted. But at least he's a great bad guy. Unfortunately, the film knows it would kind of be weird for such an otherwise classical Santa Claus to be battling somebody, so it's kind of awkward to try and develop genuine conflict. Santa and BZ never actually encounter each other in the film. Instead, Santa spends most of the second half making sidekick friends out of a homeless boy and a wealthy, neglected orphan girl, and the two storylines don't really come together as cleanly as they should. It has a strong finale, and they do manage to dispatch BZ in a pretty memorable way, but getting there is a little shaky. The director on this was Janat Zvark, who also did Somewhere in Time. He was an underappreciated filmmaker, mostly because his other movies were Jaws 2, Supergirl, and this, but he was a go-for-broke visual stylist who generally gave 110%, and if nothing else, the film is committed to its own singular a vision of itself. And in the moments that vision clicks into place, Santa Claus the movie becomes something genuinely magical, even if those moments are unevenly dispersed throughout a quintessentially early 80s attempt to smash E.T., Superman, and pseudo-secular Christmas mythology into a would-be commercial blockbuster. So then, is it a holiday classic? Well, for me, absolutely, but that's going to be in the eye of the beholder. It's a very strange but very unique movie. If you've never seen it, you should absolutely give it a shot, especially this time of year, and if you've got kids and, do the Santa Claus thing, they may just end up loving it. It may well be the weirdest Christmas movie that doesn't feature any Martians, but Santa Claus the movie is a real gem.